She laughed and said, "You're not part of this family. You're the mistake we all had to live with." That sentence, dropped like a bomb in the middle of a wedding toast, didn't just sting. It sliced through years of silent endurance I had carried like a weight. Before I go any further, make sure you hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you would have done if you were in my shoes. My name is David, and for more than 20 years I've been married to Linda. I thought I understood what it meant to marry into someone else's family. I thought patience, generosity, and time would smooth over the rough edges of being the outsider. But from the first day, her relatives treated me like a man who had walked into a room where no one had invited him. They were polite enough on the surface: holiday dinners, small talk, the occasional handshake. But underneath, the message was always the same: "You're not one of us." The woman who delivered the cruelest line at that wedding was Jessica, Linda's younger sister. Jessica, with her wide smile and perfect timing, had always been the golden child of the family. No matter what she did, her parents gushed over her, her brothers hovered protectively around her, and Linda admired her. I used to believe it was harmless sibling admiration, but over time I realized that Jessica's shadow stretched over everything. When Linda and I first married, her parents made no effort to hide their disappointment. They had wanted her to marry someone from their circle, someone who could keep the family reputation polished. Instead, she chose me, a man who had built his own company from the ground up, who didn't come from old money or big names. I wasn't ashamed of that. I was proud of it. But to them, I was always the reminder that their daughter hadn't followed the script. I still tried. I hosted dinners. I took everyone on vacations. I paid for things no one even thanked me for. I told myself that if I just gave more, eventually they'd accept me. There were moments, tiny flickers, when I thought I saw warmth in their eyes. But it always disappeared, like a candle snuffed out by a hidden draft. The wedding weekend started like any other family event. Awkward smiles, stiff hugs, and me standing just a little apart from everyone else while they slipped back into their familiar rhythm. The rehearsal dinner was a blur of laughter that didn't include me. The jokes flew back and forth across the table like a ball game I was never invited to play in. Linda sat beside me, smiling, laughing along with them, and I told myself I didn't mind. But the day of the wedding, that was different. The ceremony was beautiful, the kind that makes strangers cry. Jessica looked radiant, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot how she'd treated me over the years. But the reception, the speeches, the toasts, that's when everything shifted. When it was Jessica's turn to speak, she held her champagne glass high, her voice smooth and teasing. She thanked her new husband, her parents, her siblings, and then, with a wicked sparkle in her eye, she turned toward me. "And of course," she said, to David, "the family mistake we all learned to live with." The laughter that followed wasn't nervous or hesitant. It was full, unrestrained. Her brothers laughed. Her cousins laughed. Even some of the guests who didn't know me laughed, because the delivery was so sharp it sounded like a rehearsed punchline. My face burned. I looked at Linda, hoping she would say something, anything. She didn't. She smiled weakly, eyes fixed on her sister, as though agreeing that the joke was just too good to ruin. I raised my glass slowly, forcing a smile onto my lips. My hand shook so badly, I thought the champagne would spill over the rim. I wanted to walk out right then, to leave them to their perfect little world and never look back. But I stayed. I stayed because I had learned to swallow humiliation for the sake of keeping peace. That night, lying awake in the hotel room while Linda slept beside me, I replayed the moment again and again. The laughter, the words, the silence from my own wife. My chest felt tight, not with sadness, but with something harder, sharper. For the first time in years, I realized I had given them everything: time, money, dignity, and in return, they had given me nothing but disdain. I stared at the ceiling until the first light of morning crept through the curtains, and in that silence, something inside me shifted. When I woke up that morning, the world outside the hotel window looked calm, almost serene, as if nothing had happened the night before. But inside me, there was a storm I could no longer contain. For years I had convinced myself that patience was strength, that biting my tongue was maturity, that absorbing insult after insult was the price I had to pay for love. But when Jessica's words echoed through that ballroom, amplified by laughter, it shattered the illusion I had built. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, while Linda stirred and asked if I had slept at all. I told her I was fine, though my voice cracked in ways I could not hide. She smiled softly, kissed my shoulder, and said we should get ready for the family brunch. The idea of sitting across from those faces again, pretending everything was normal, filled me with a quiet rage I had never felt before. Linda didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to care. She hummed as she put on her dress, touched up her makeup, and spoke about how beautiful the ceremony had been. I watched her, remembering all the times I had defended her silence, all the excuses I had made for her refusal to stand up for me. She doesn't want conflict, I had told myself. She's torn between me and them. But the truth was simpler and crueler. She didn't want to lose her place at their table, even if it meant leaving me alone at mine. As we walked into the banquet hall, I could feel the eyes on me. Some smiled politely, others smirked, as though the joke from the night before was still hanging in the air. Jessica was radiant in her post-wedding glow, basking in the attention, her husband proudly by her side. When she saw me, she gave a little wave, a grin tugging at her lips, the kind of grin that said she knew she had gotten away with something. My jaw tightened, but I returned the gesture with a stiff nod. During brunch, conversation flowed easily around me, never through me. The men talked about business deals and golf scores. The women exchanged stories about their children and homes, and I sat there, stirring my coffee, waiting for a moment that never came. Then, halfway through the meal, Jessica raised her glass again, this time to toast her parents for everything they had done. Her voice was dripping with affection as she called them the foundation of the family. Everyone applauded, clinking glasses, their faces shining with pride. That was when I remembered the truth no one else seemed to grasp. Without me, none of this would be possible. Years ago, when Linda and I had first married, my parents had established a trust fund, one meant to provide stability for our branch of the family. It was generous, substantial, the kind of wealth that could secure futures, pay off homes, and support ventures. Out of loyalty to my wife, I had extended that trust to her family. I allowed her parents, her siblings, and even Jessica to benefit. Vacations were covered, tuition bills handled, medical expenses paid discreetly when they pretended they had done it themselves. They never said thank you. They acted as though it were their right, as though the money came from some invisible fountain that just happened to flow their way. And I let them. I told myself it was family, that helping them meant building bonds. I convinced myself that if I gave enough, eventually they would see me as one of them. But sitting there at that brunch table, watching Jessica soak in the applause while I sat in silence, I realized the ugly truth. They had never accepted me, and they never would. To them, I was not family. I was a resource. Linda leaned over, touching my arm gently, whispering that I looked tired. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside my head decisions were forming like thunderheads. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about winning their approval. I wasn't thinking about patience or understanding. I was thinking about power, about the one card I still held close to my chest. When brunch finally ended and we returned to our room, Linda collapsed onto the bed, kicking off her shoes and sighing about how exhausting weddings could be. I sat down at the desk, pulled out my laptop, and stared at the screen. The trust documents were there, neatly organized, waiting. My fingers hovered over the keys, trembling not with hesitation, but with a strange exhilaration. For so long, I had been the man who stayed quiet, who let others laugh, who believed dignity meant restraint. But in that moment, I understood that dignity sometimes meant drawing a line no one could cross. I thought about Jessica's smirk, her words cutting deeper than she would ever admit. I thought about Linda's silence, her unwillingness to shield me from the storm. I thought about every holiday, every gathering, every backhanded compliment and whispered slight. And with each memory, my resolve solidified. The cursor blinked on the screen, a tiny metronome marking the seconds. My hand steadied, and I began to type. The keys clicked under my fingers as if each stroke was a declaration, a statement I had been too afraid to voice for decades. My eyes scanned the documents, every line of legal text that I had read before but never fully considered in this way. The trust was ironclad, written by attorneys who understood power and permanence. Control lay entirely with me. I could open the gates or close them without explanation, without warning, without a single signature from anyone else. For years, I had treated that power like a formality, a ceremonial title that I would never actually use. But now, as the echoes of Jessica's laughter burned in my mind, I saw it for what it really was: leverage. Linda stirred behind me, propped up on the pillows, scrolling through her phone with a soft hum. She didn't ask what I was doing. She had grown so accustomed to me handling the tedious details of life, the ones she never wanted to bother with. It was easier for her to turn a blind eye, to live in the bubble her family provided while I quietly ensured it never popped. I wondered then if she even realized how much of their comfort, their stability, their pride had been paid for by my hand. I logged into the secure portal, heart pounding with a rhythm that felt almost triumphant. Rows of accounts, assets, properties, all neatly displayed in figures that could change lives with a single keystroke. I hovered over the options, reading the words suspend disbursements and freeze transfers. It felt surreal, almost cinematic, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff I had stared at for years, finally ready to jump. My finger pressed down on the mouse, and with one click, the machinery of their entitlement ground to a halt. The silence afterward was deafening. It wasn't the silence of a hotel room or the quiet of a lazy morning. It was the silence of liberation, the kind that comes when a man finally drops the chains he has been dragging for too long. I leaned back, staring at the screen, watching the status change from active to suspended. My chest rose and fell with a breath that tasted sharper, cleaner, freer than any I had taken in years. Linda finally noticed the look on my face. She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What are you working on?" she asked casually, as though I were answering emails or paying bills. I turned to her, studying the woman I had loved, the woman I had defended, the woman who had chosen silence when I needed her voice. For a moment, I wanted to tell her everything, to unleash the years of resentment, the betrayal I felt not only from her family but from her indifference. But instead, I simply smiled and said, "Just tying up loose ends." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her phone. Later that afternoon, while Linda attended a bridal brunch with her mother and sisters, I stayed behind. My phone buzzed with notifications, emails from the bank, confirmations of account status changes, legal notices verifying my actions. Each message was a stone dropping into a pond, rippling outward toward the family who had never imagined I would use the authority they had dismissed as meaningless. I imagined their faces when the bills arrived unpaid, when the tuition checks bounced, when the credit lines they leaned on without hesitation suddenly evaporated. A part of me felt guilty, but it was drowned out by a stronger voice, one I had buried for too long. They had earned this. That evening, when Linda returned, she was glowing from the festivities, carrying stories and laughter from the table I had chosen to avoid. She poured herself a glass of wine, kicked off her heels, and told me about Jessica's speech at the brunch, how heartfelt it had been, how everyone had cried. I listened silently, nodding where appropriate, though inside I was counting the hours until reality would catch up with them. She didn't notice my quietness, too wrapped up in the warmth of her family's world. As the night grew late, I stepped outside onto the balcony, the cool air biting against my skin. The city lights stretched out before me, endless and indifferent, while behind me laughter still echoed from the halls where the newlyweds celebrated. I thought about the years I had given away, the dignity I had bartered for scraps of affection, the patience I had mistaken for love. And standing there, hands gripping the railing, I felt no regret. Not anymore. When I finally went back inside, Linda was already asleep, her face serene, untouched by the storm that was brewing just beyond her awareness. I lay down beside her, staring into the darkness, and for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Not the fragile calm of denial, but the steady calm of a man who had acted, who had chosen his line in the sand and refused to step back. The morning would come soon enough, and with it, the consequences of the choice I had made. But as I closed my eyes, the sound of Jessica's mocking laughter faded, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The phone calls began the next morning. At first, it was just a single vibration, a message from the bank confirming that the trust disbursements had been halted. Then came the emails, each one a mechanical reminder that what had once flowed so freely was now locked away. I sat in the chair by the window, sipping my coffee slowly, almost ceremonially, as if I were witnessing the opening act of a play I had written in secret. Linda was still asleep, her hair spilling across the pillow, the calm look on her face untouched by what was about to unravel. By the time she finally stirred and reached for her phone, the storm had already begun. She frowned at the screen, her eyes darting as she read message after message, her lips parting as though words were forming but never arriving. She looked at me, confusion in her eyes. "David, did something happen with the trust?" she asked. My heart thudded once, heavy, but I kept my face still. I set the coffee down and said, "Yes." I froze it. Her reaction was a mixture of shock and disbelief, as though I had told her the sun would no longer rise. She sat up quickly, her voice rising, asking me why, asking me if it was a mistake. I watched her panic, and for a fleeting moment I almost softened, almost told her I would undo it. But then I remembered the laughter, the silence, the years of dismissal. My voice was steady when I answered. It wasn't a mistake. It was necessary. Linda pressed her hands to her temples, pacing the room, muttering about her parents, about Jessica, about the chaos this would cause. Not once did she ask how I felt. Not once did she acknowledge what had been done to me. It was all about them, as it had always been. The calls from her family started within the hour. First her mother, her voice sharp, demanding to know what was going on. Then her father, his tone cold, as though I had betrayed some sacred oath. Each call was a performance of outrage, dripping with entitlement, filled with accusations that I was cruel, selfish, vindictive. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply told them the trust was under my control and I had exercised my right to protect it. Their fury poured through the receiver, but it only hardened my resolve. For the first time, they were powerless, and they knew it. Jessica's call came last. Her voice was laced with venom, the mockery from her wedding toast replaced by raw anger. She screamed that I had ruined her honeymoon, that bills were bouncing, that she was embarrassed in front of her new husband. She demanded I fix it immediately. And as she raged, I felt something shift inside me. I realized that her cruelty, her smug superiority, had always been fueled by the belief that I would never fight back. My reply was calm, measured, almost gentle. "Jessica," I said, "you told me I wasn't part of the family. Now I'm giving you exactly what you wanted. My money, my trust, my support. It's no longer yours. Consider it freedom." Her silence on the other end was sharp, a silence so loud it nearly rattled the phone. Then she cursed me and hung up. Linda wept that afternoon. She begged me to reconsider, pleaded that I was punishing everyone for one person's mistake. I listened, but I couldn't ignore the truth that had crystallized in me. This wasn't just about Jessica's words. It was about decades of being treated as an outsider, decades of carrying them on my back while they spit on the ground I walked. I told Linda that if she wanted to return to them, she could. But the trust, the lifeline they had grown fat and lazy on, was done. She stared at me, eyes wide, as though she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe for the first time she was seeing the man I should have been all along. That evening, I went for a walk alone. The city buzzed with life, cars rushing by, voices echoing from crowded sidewalks. No one knew what storm I had unleashed. No one knew the quiet revolution that had happened in a hotel room just hours earlier. I felt strangely small in the vastness of the world, yet powerful in a way I had never known. I had finally claimed my dignity, finally refused to be the family's scapegoat, the invisible provider they could mock without consequence. When I returned, Linda was silent, curled up on the bed with her back to me. I didn't try to reach for her. I didn't apologize. I simply sat down, opened my laptop, and began to write down everything. Every insult, every moment of humiliation, every memory of being pushed to the margins. Not as justification, but as a record, a reminder to myself that this decision hadn't been born from one night of cruelty, but from a lifetime of it. The hours stretched on, the night deepened, and still I felt no regret. The trust was frozen, their safety net gone, their illusion of superiority cracked. They would curse me, they would hate me, but they would finally understand that I was never the mistake. I was the foundation they had built their comfort on, and now that foundation was gone. So I sit here now, telling you this story, not as a man seeking sympathy, but as a man who finally found his voice. If you've ever been dismissed, disrespected, or treated as less than what you are, you'll understand why I did it. And if you don't, then maybe you've never had to sit at a table full of people who laugh at your expense while feeding off your sacrifices. Either way, my story is mine, and I won't apologize for it. If you've listened this far, I want to thank you. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment sharing what you think. Would you have done the same? Or would you have walked away quietly? I'll be reading every single one.